On today's episode of What's Going On with Shipping, what does Project 2025 say about maritime policy? I'm your host, Sal Mercogliano. Welcome to today's episode. So, if you've been following the presidential election here in the United States, it's been interesting. We had the two oldest human beings ever to run for president running. We had now one of them, the sitting president, withdraw, and now his vice president is running in his place. And then the other candidate, who was president and now running again as president, had an assassination attempt against him. So, a lot of drama here in the American presidential election. But what I want to look at is some policy issues. Heritage Foundation, which is a conservative libertarian think tank, they put out a report a few months ago called Project 2025. And in this massive report, there is a section, a brief section, about a page and a half, but barely a page and a half, on maritime policy. If you're new to the channel, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so be alerted about new videos as they come out. So this is the report, and again, it's a little over a page long. It's not a lot on maritime policy, but what's in it to me is really interesting. Opening paragraph. The Maritime Administration was established by President Harry Truman in 1950 and then transferred to Department of Transportation in 1981. It's an offshoot. The Maritime Administration came out of what was called the U.S. Maritime Commission. The Maritime Commission was the entity that helped build the fleet that was essential for transporting the arsenal of democracy from the home front to the battlefront. A principal function is, quote, maintaining the overall health of the U.S. merchant marine. That is the primary mission, actually, of the Maritime Administration, which is important both to national defense and to foreign and domestic commerce. If you look at the preamble of the Merchant Marine Act of 1936, which is still stated law, that is a requirement and something that the Maritime Administration is supposed to be doing. MARAD is also in charge of the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy and operates ships and funding for the 6 state maritime academies. So this kind of lays out exactly what MARAD is. I will note a couple of key things in here that I think are really important. Merchant Marine Academy, created in 1943 up at Kings Point in Queens, New York, was created. It's the only occupation that has a service academy. All the other service academies are geared toward military service. We're going to come back to that and talk about it. And then the 6 state maritime academies, we're talking about Maine, Massachusetts, New York, Texas, Great Lakes, which is in Michigan, and then California, all also produce merchant mariners, both deck and engine licensed officers. Second paragraph, MARAD would be better served by being transferred from the Department of Transportation to the Department of Homeland Security. I could not disagree more with that statement. I am 100%, I want to make sure there's no ambiguity here. That is wrong. I completely disagree with that, and I'll explain why in a second. MARAD is the only DOT modal administration that does not regulate the industry that it represents. The maritime industry is regulated by the U.S. Coast Guard, ships and personnel, and by the Federal Maritime Commission, cargo rates and competitive practices. Okay, hang on. The reason the Coast Guard regulates the MARAD is because they assumed that mission after World War II. Prior to that, it was the Warshipping Administration, it was the U.S. Maritime Commission that regulated itself, and then before that, it was under the Department of Commerce. The argument here by Heritage is that, well, since the Coast Guard is under Homeland Security, MARAD should be under Homeland Security. No, I think the fix for this is get the Coast Guard out of regulating the merchant marine, period. They don't want this mission. They don't want it. They don't want to be the regulatory agency over the merchant marine. Get rid of it. Allow the Maritime Administration, which is under the Department of Transportation, to do it. Understand, aviation, road, rail, they're all under transportation. Why would you move one of 4 modal means of transportation out of the Department of Transportation, but leave the other 3 there? That'd be like saying, well, aviation should be under the Department of the Air Force, or road should be under the Department of Army. This is a big problem in the U.S. Merchant Marine right now. Merchant mariners cannot get credentialing. I got my first Merchant Marine credential in 1989. It has changed 6 times, the method of credentialing since then. 6 times. Right now, to get a Merchant Marine credential, you have to get it out of the Coast Guard Credentialing Office, which is located in the most maritime state possible, West Virginia, because Senator Byrd had it put up there years ago. They are using a printer that is controlled and operated by 2 very sweet old ladies. I'm not being mean here. They're elderly ladies who run it. They're the only ones who know how to run it. And to the point that it was so hard to get parts for this machine that they're basically changing the method they're using again. Now they're going back to the system they used a long time ago. This is ridiculous. It should be changed. But I disagree with the idea of transferring it over to Homeland Security. Third paragraph. Furthermore, MARAD has responsibilities both in peacetime commerce and operationally in wartime crisis sea lift through its responsibility to manage the National Defense Reserve Fleet and the 45-ship Ready Reserve Force for the U.S. Navy. Now, the NDRF, the National Defense Reserve Fleet, doesn't exist really anymore. It is a bottomless pit of ships waiting to be scrapped. The idea that you're going to activate ships from the NDRF doesn't exist. The Ready Reserve Force does exist. It is maintained by the Department of Transportation, the Maritime Administration, for the U.S. Navy, but not even for the U.S. Navy. It's actually maintained for the U.S. Transportation Command because the ships in the Ready Reserve Force don't support the U.S. Navy, they support the military, specifically the Army, the Air Force, and the Marine Corps. These missions are unique to MARAD within DOT. As a result, MARAD's mission and purpose, and therefore its funding priorities, are not well understood and historically have been minimalized in planning and budget. So we just saw this happen where the last of the reserve sea lift ships went from the U.S. Navy's Military Sea Lift Command over to the Department of Transportation's U.S. Maritime Administration. I disagreed with that. I think they should have stayed under Military Sea Lift Command. These are strategic sea lift assets, should have been maintained within the Department of Defense, not the Department of Transportation, but now they're all over there. And the argument here is MARAD's mission is basically training mariners through the maritime academies and maintaining this reserve fleet. I would argue the primary mission of the Maritime Administration is promoting the Merchant Marine. That's their key thing. But they don't get to do that because they got to focus on these two other missions, and we need to realign these missions. Fourth, MARAD includes its subordinate service academies. The U.S. Merchant Marine Academy should be transferred to the Department of Defense if Coast Guard is located there because DHS has been eliminated. Okay, again, I 100% disagree with this statement. Or to the Department of Homeland Security. No, you don't move the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy under the Department of Defense. Yeah, they operate service academies themselves. Make that more efficient. Move all 5 service academies under one banner, but no one's going to do that. It doesn't make any sense to do that. Give the Maritime Administration the authority to oversee it. Now, the problem is the Maritime Administration is woefully underfunded, understaffed, and they do not have the wherewithal to do this now. And you would have to plus them up and move assets from other agencies under them. Continuing, in this way, the two agencies charged with oversight and regulation of the maritime sector, MARAD and the U.S. Coast Guard, will be aligned under the same department where operational efficiencies could be realized more easily. All right, so you're going to put MARAD and the Coast Guard in the Department of Defense because this will align. It's not the same mission. These are not defense missions. Coast Guard's mission are police powers. It's enforcement. It's regulatory. It is not defense. And putting them under defense doesn't work. Same thing with MARAD. MARAD is supposed to be doing commercial shipping. That's their role. It is not defense shipping. And again, I think Heritage focuses more on the defense mission than on the commercial sector. And they don't quite understand it in some ways. Next, serious consideration should be given to repealing or substantially reforming the Jones Act, which would require legislation. The economic cost of the Jones Act, which is notionally in place to promote a robust merchant marine, vastly exceeds its effect on the supply of domestic ships. For instance, no liquefied natural gas can be shipped from Alaska to the lower 48 states because there are no U.S. flag ships that carry LNG. Okay. The problem with that statement is we don't ship any LNG from Alaska, number one. I mean, none. Go look at the EIA report. There is no liquefied natural gas coming out of Alaska. Now, there is liquefied natural gas coming out of the United States, and that needs to be addressed. The concept of repealing the Jones Act, I don't think Heritage understands what they mean when they say that, because that would open up inland waterways, coastal, Great Lakes, fishing, tugs, ferries, everything for foreign shipping, foreign mariners, everything. You would open up the floodgates. You would kill what is left of the U.S. Merchant Marine in the United States. If they're talking about sustaining the U.S. Merchant Marine, the worst thing you can do is repeal the Jones Act. Now, let's be clear. It needs to be reformed dramatically. If you want to get LNG carrying in the United States, then put in a waiver, a 5 to 10 year waiver that allows you to bring in foreign-built LNG carriers into the U.S. registry until LNG carriers can be built in the United States. I don't buy for one friggin' second the idea that it's 4 times, 5 times more to build a ship in the United States. Yeah, okay. If you look at the numbers coming out of China, yeah, but you have to factor in subsidies, the cheap costs, all the things that China dumps into their shipbuilding to lower that cost. You also have to scale up so that we're not just building 1 or 2 ships, that we're building 3, 5, 10 ships, and you get a economy of scale there. They are looking at this solely in this issue. And let me be clear, if you order an LNG right now from overseas, you ain't getting it for 5 years because the order book is so chocker-blocked. You're not getting it from overseas. So don't think for a minute that starting a new LNG production line in the United States is that far-fetched. What we need to do is start a new shipyard somewhere, Texas, Georgia, somewhere beyond where the current shipyards are, and start scaling up with a new style of shipbuilding. If there are general concerns about U.S. fleet capacity in the absence of the Jones Act, it would be possible to do so through an expansion of the Defense Reserve Fleet. Okay, I think they mean the National Defense Reserve Fleet because there's no Defense Reserve Fleet. The NDRF is a batch of old ships that are heading for scrap. There's nothing there that you can pull from. And again, I think this is Heritage talking about a topic they don't fully understand at times. And so therefore they're saying things, for example, like pulling LNG from Alaska. I think we need to have a serious discussion about reforming the Jones Act. But understand, Jones Act in 1920 was a holistic piece of legislation that dealt not just with coastal shipping, but international shipping, shipyards, training, protection for mariners, funding, loans, government oversight, rate control, you name it. It covered everything. And what we've done over the past 124 years is basically hack pieces of the Jones Act off. Until now, there's really only 3 pieces left that protects U.S. shipping. It's the Jones Act. This is the coastal trade portion, Section 27 of the Act. There is the Maritime Security Program, the Tanker Security Program, the Cable Ship Security Program, which gives operating funds to ships to keep them in the U.S. registry, and then cargo preference that makes it so that you have to haul U.S. cargo. We need to revamp all 3 of those and not just one element. 6th paragraph, another DHS agency, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, is a frequent user of MARAD, Ready Reserve Force shipping during disaster assistance missions. I don't know what they mean by frequent. It doesn't happen very frequently. We are currently building national security multi-mission vessels, the NSMVs, for the state maritime academies, with their primary mission being to support disaster relief in the United States. Their second being training platforms for the State Maritime Academy. Transferring MARAD to DHS would make coordination and requisition of these vessels a smoother and more rapid process. There's nothing that needs to be more smoother or rapid. This is a non sequitur. Activating those ships and getting crews on them it would not be easier under MARAD or DHS. It wouldn't. DHS has responsibility for reviewing and approving Jones Act waivers. I disagree with that. I don't know why DHS is the agency that approves Jones Act waivers. This should be under Commerce and Transportation. It shouldn't be under DHS. This process first requires a market survey of available shipping tonnage that is completed by MARAD. MARAD should be doing this all the time, but again, we undersource MARAD. So MARAD, for example, just a quick little example of how undersourced MARAD is. An annual report, which should be done annually, has not been done by MARAD since, wait for it, 2013. They have gone 11 years without doing an annual report. And if you look at the old annual reports done by MARAD, these were treasure troves of information, of commerce, of transport, all the stuff you want to understand your commercial shipping to be. They haven't done it for 13 years. And why they haven't done it? They don't have the resources, they don't have the manpower, and they're not required to do it. And if you tell someone they're not required to do it, they're not going to do it. Goes on, the process of Jones Act waiver requests would be streamlined if both agencies were in the same department. No, what would streamline Jones Act waivers is if we had the personnel and people monitoring shipping all the time, so that when a shipping firm says, I want a Jones Act waiver because I want to haul diesel fuel to Puerto Rico because a hurricane hit it, they can sit there and say, time out. There's just deliveries of diesel fuel. There are diesel fuel heading there right now. And oh, by the way, there's so much diesel fuel in the port that you can't offload any more diesel fuel because the situation in Puerto Rico isn't the delivery of diesel fuel. It's the internal distribution around the island. That's what should be done. And that's something that Heritage is missing here. And then finally, DHS as a department is experienced in administering and budgeting for the operation of an existing federal service academy, the U.S. Coast Guard Academy, which is similar to the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy in size. There would be increased efficiencies and better alignment of the missions of these two institutions if they were under one single department that has equity in the industries served by these academies. They don't serve the same industries. The Coast Guard is regulatory. The Merchant Marine is commerce. It's transportation. It is goods. It is two completely different oriented entities. This is like saying, again, put all the service academies under the Department of Defense then. This way there's all one aspect. It does not make sense to do this. The argument that I think is missing here is that the Heritage Foundation is looking at this through the prism of what is an efficiency. Let's look at how we can streamline things. And this is actually what hurt the Merchant Marine back in the 1980s when they removed things like the construction and operational differential subsidies under the Merchant Marine Act of 1936 that saw U.S. shipbuilding go overseas to Europe, to Korea, to Japan. That is not what's helping. What we need to see here is a better realignment. For example, one of the things I would be advocating for, which they don't seem to be, is the reconstitution of the U.S. Maritime Service. This would be a service that is geared specifically for the Merchant Marine. It was created under the Merchant Marine Act of 1936, Title 13, which was passed in 1938. Established the Maritime Service, which was the training arm of the Merchant Marine. It's actually what the Merchant Marine Academy and the 6 state maritime academies are under. Under the Secretary of Transportation, he or she can establish a basically an arm, the Maritime Service, and assign people to it for the training and operation of the Merchant Marine. This is similar to the U.S. Public Health Service, the NOAA Corps, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration Corps. This is what we would see set up. And establish a U.S. Maritime Service under a commandant and admiral, and you would go ahead and start instituting a lot of the changes that are being advocated for here. And I think that is something that Heritage should be looking for. I think this realignment is not something that is in the best interests of the maritime sector. They talk about the Federal Maritime Commission early on this, but you don't talk much more about it afterwards. Back in the day, in 1961, they hacked off the Federal Maritime Bureau at the time from the Maritime Administration, and they separated domestic from international commerce. And now the Federal Maritime Commission is a separate commission all on itself. I think you need to realign things. I think we need to have a conversation about that. I think the Maritime Administration needs to be revamped, repowered. It should have the same kind of oversight that the FAA has. The FAA regulates the aviation industry. They issue licenses for the pilots. They oversee the airports. They help set up the traffic control. They do all the elements that control aviation. There should be the 4 horsemen of the Secretary of Transportation. There should be road, rail, aviation, and maritime. Give the Maritime Administrator the same power the Federal Aviation Administrator has. Put someone who knows the maritime sector in charge of that. Appoint an admiral to oversee the Maritime Service to get the 6 maritime academies along with the Federal Maritime Academy in line with each other. There are a lot of things that can be done here, but unfortunately, I think Project 2025 is looking at something and they're like, well, let's all put this under the Department of Homeland Security and that will take care of it. But ocean shipping isn't Homeland Security. It is commerce. It is transportation. It is business. It is a commercial aspect. And understand, you cannot revitalize the U.S. Merchant Marine until you have cargo to haul on it. And then you need the ships to do it, and you need to incentivize that. And I don't think going under the Department of Homeland Security is the best bet for this. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so be alerted about new videos as they come out. Leave a comment, share it across social media, and if you can, support the page. How do you do that? You hit that super thanks button down below, or head on over to Patreon and become a monthly or yearly subscriber. Till next episode, Sal, signing off.